beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. This is part 4 of my series of videos that look at common mistakes made by homebrewers all the way through the process from grain to glass. The purpose of this series is to put people on the right track within a number of different areas within each video. If you find that you are already on the right track with these topics, then that's great, and I hope you will find this to be reassuring. I will not go into huge detail on each topic, but where appropriate I will link forward to further information within the video and mirror these links within the video's YouTube description. So let's get started. Oxidation in homebrew. It is fair to say that oxygen is your friend before fermentation, but after this point it becomes your enemy and will cause your beer to become stale much faster. Mistakes can certainly be as simple as transferring from your fermenter into your keg with too short a siphon hose, which then creates splashing and thus oxygen, or by simply not purging a keg properly. Oxidation is sadly all too common reason for homebrewers to end up with a beer that is simply not suitable for its purpose and needs to be poured down the sink. Many homebrewers do these things and more without even knowing that they are heading for trouble. If you find that the shelf life of your beers is very limited, perhaps you are tasting that wet cardboard and you see a darkening in colour, then it is certainly going to be due to the effects of oxidation. Do take note that the effects take some 6 weeks to develop, but will essentially make your beer go stale prematurely after this point. How long this will take will depend on the severity of the errors. Thankfully, unlike some issues, this effect is easy to spot and taste pretty early. The first effects will usually be a loss of hop flavour and a darkening of the beer, and a less than pleasant taste often associated with wet cardboard and paper. For more details on oxidation, consult this full guide shown on screen now. This video also contains a method for knowing for certain if a beer is oxidised or not very early on in its life. Let's now look at what I am calling here the overuse of pressure fermentation. Now do not misunderstand me here. Pressure fermentation certainly has its place in my heart, and I believe that it should have a place in yours too. But there really are some recommended guidelines here to follow. Firstly, by using too much pressure than a yeast can actually handle, you will literally kill it. Do not be one of these homebrewers who blames the yeast for this either. You have control of this, and too much pressure would kill you also. Shown on screen now in angular bar chart form are some common yeast types and maximum pressure tested data that has been collected by myself and members of this YouTube channel's Facebook group. This pressure data is based on what has been trialled with success. Naturally, this is only part of the data that we have collected, and further information like temperature, for example, is also available in spreadsheet form in the group. So far we have collected various data for over 22 different yeast types. It is vital to understand that different yeast types have different levels of tolerance in various forms including pressure, and that your yeast health is something of paramount importance during fermentation. Hence why I have been very keen to collect this data and share it for the benefit of everyone. By having such information, you never need run the risk of killing your yeast. I also feel it is important to mention as a final comment that adding large amounts of pressure to yeast, even if it does not die as a result, is really not necessary. Yeast in general would really rather not be under pressure, and the best results are actually found by finding a pressure sweet spot rather than the highest level of pressure. This is an area that needs much more time spent on it, but as the results come in I will make them public. The second category of concern under the overuse of pressure fermentation heading is regarding to homebrewers who simply use pressure with all fermentations, no matter which type of beer style or yeast is used. I am seeing more and more homebrewers doing this that do not realise what they are losing or doing wrong. Now I do understand fully that people get blown away by the benefits of pressure fermentation and that they wish to use the new equipment they have purchased to its fullest. It is important to realise though that some styles really need the esters from the yeast that pressure fermentation removes to be either complete or to be to the style. For example, if you brew an intended Belgian wit and you use the correct yeast, but then use this under pressure, then frankly you may as well have used an American neutral yeast, because it is probably going to end up just like an American wheat beer, not the Belgian wit that you intended. Equally, it has been noted that if you use Fermentis SO4 under pressure, then the profile you end up with is very lager-like. Not a bad thing if you wanted a lager-like profile for a lager, but I would take it that in using SO4 that you wanted an English ale profile instead. I also want to make it very clear that the concern I have here is not that potentially now an extra special bitter now has a lager profile, if that was actually the brewer's choice. What concerns me is the scenario that in the end the result was not as intended and the brewer now wonders what actually went wrong. Let's now move on to another overuse problem, this time in relation to rice hulls. It is fair to say that some grain bills will certainly benefit from the use of rice or oat hulls to avoid stuck mashes or sparges. The hulls actually allow a good flow rate through the grain bed during recirculation of your mash and act as filters during your sparge, allowing the lautering to take place faster. Usually these hulls will be used with grain bills that feature a lot of wheat or rye. I have successfully mashed brews using pump recirculation with 60% wheat without rice hulls at all, but if I was to go to 70% then I would certainly opt for them. Some brews that contain a lot of wheat, rye or both, like this one shown here from a recent video, are really best done as brew in the bag. This combination of 75% wheat and 15% rye really does provide too much issue for pump recirculation that simply cannot be countered with rice hulls without tipping the scale of efficiency the other way. The problem here is that you would need to add so many rice hulls in a brew like this that your mash would be super free flowing and your sparge would just drop through the grain bed like water being dropped from a height onto a floor. So naturally this means that your efficiency would be adversely affected. This is precisely what you do though when you add too many rice hulls to any grain bill. So if you have a regular grain bill without wheat or rye, then the use of rice hulls can certainly be counterproductive. Having said this, these hulls can be used when you have a grain bill that has been crushed too finely as an emergency solution. Add these as shown here and stir them into your mash. The amount that you need to use here is quite minimal, and because these are really light, it is common and better to measure them in handfuls rather than weight. A handful will go nicely with a 25 litre or 6.6 US liquid gallon batch, but this is about the maximum and lesser issues can be cured by less. This particular example shown here was a brew that I purposely milled super finely for the purpose of a video to show how to rescue such a brew that has a super stuck mash. So naturally this was rather an extreme version, but the brew went well after this point anyway and the resulting beer was very good. I do hear of homebrewers using hulls for every brew because the grain crush they have is too fine by default. I totally sympathise with those that do this because their local homebrew store is milling for them and they are finding it hard to get the message across. Naturally the ultimate answer here is to obtain your own grain mill if your budget allows for it. Setting up a grain mill can take a little time to get right of course, and this is covered in the video shown on screen now. Having the right grain crush is paramount to your brew, and frankly without it you really have no way of accurately predicting your numbers and creating the beer balance desired. Everything stems from your grain crush. If you are not yet a member of this channel's Facebook group and perhaps you are interested in our collective spreadsheet for pressure fermentation data, or maybe you would like to simply be a part of this ever-growing community of friendly and helpful brewers, then please do use the links shown on screen to apply to join. Please be sure to read and understand the group rules that are set out to keep the group friendly and helpful. This now brings this video to a close. If you have any questions then please let me know via YouTube or Facebook. I do hope that you found this video to be useful, interesting and enjoyable. If appropriate then please like this video on YouTube, and if you've not done so already then please subscribe. I regularly post new content. Happy brewing!